Take off that ring before you embarrass yourself." The sentence cut through the county courthouse so sharply that even the clerk stopped stamping papers. Claire Whitaker stood 3 steps from the marriage counter, with her left hand half hidden inside the sleeve of her faded blue coat. The silver ring on her finger was too loose, too old, and too plain for a woman from a family that once owned half the wheat fields outside Briar Glen, Montana. But she didn't take it off. Across from her, Victoria Sterling smiled like she had not just humiliated a woman in public. She stood near the courthouse doors in a cream wool coat, leather gloves folded over one wrist, her gray blonde hair pinned with the kind of precision that made people lower their voices around her. Behind her, 2 bank officers, a county clerk, and half a dozen people pretending not to listen had gone still. Claire's face had gone pale, but her chin stayed lifted. Elias Grayson stood beside her in a clean white shirt that still held the crease marks from the drawer. One side of his face looked like any other man's face, tired eyes, unshaved jaw, a deep line between his brows from years of looking into weather before it broke. The other side made people look twice. The scar began near his left temple, crossed down his cheek in a jagged pale line, and disappeared beneath his collar like lightning had once chosen him and failed to finish the job. Children stared at it. Men acted casual around it. Women looked away quickly and then looked guilty for looking away. Victoria looked directly at it. Then she turned back to Claire. "You cannot possibly expect this town to believe you married him out of love," she said, soft enough to sound polite and loud enough to wound. "Your father is dead, your house is gone, your name is ruined. And now you expect everyone to accept that the scarred farmer from Mill Road suddenly became your husband." A nervous sound moved through the room, not quite laughter, worse than laughter. The sound people make when cruelty gives them permission to feel superior. Claire's fingers tightened around the old ring. Elias noticed because he noticed small things: a nail bent under a barn hinge, a storm turning from blue-gray to green, a calf breathing too fast in cold weather, a woman trying not to fall apart in front of people who had already decided what she was. The clerk cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sterling, this is a public office." Victoria did not look at him. "Claire," she said, and for the first time her voice lost its sweetness, "your father should have taught you better than this." Something changed in Claire's eyes. It was small, but Elias saw it: pain first, then anger, then something that looked almost like fear. Not fear of Victoria. Fear of what Victoria knew. Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. Elias stepped forward before he knew he was moving. The room shifted away from him by instinct. People always did. A scar on a man's face made strangers imagine violence even when his hands were empty. His hands were empty now, but his voice was not. "Say one more thing about her father," Elias said, "and you'll need to say it in front of a judge." Victoria blinked once. A few people looked up. Elias rarely spoke in town unless he had to. At the feed store he paid in exact cash, loaded his own sacks, and left before anyone could ask how his face was doing. At the diner he sat at the counter nearest the door. At church, when he still went, he sat in the back pew beneath the cracked window. Quiet men are easy to dismiss, until they stop being quiet. Victoria studied him, and for the first time that morning the smile left her mouth before it reached her eyes. "You think a marriage license protects you?" she asked. "No," Elias said, "but the truth might." A bank officer near the wall lowered his gaze. Claire looked at Elias, not with gratitude, not yet with alarm. As if he had just stepped onto a bridge she knew was already burning underneath them. The clerk pushed the certificate across the counter with 2 fingers. "Mr. Grayson, sign here, Mrs. Grayson." The name landed in the room like a verdict nobody had expected to hear. Claire stared at the paper. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. Elias noticed the ink stain on her thumb, the frayed cuff of her coat, the fact that she had polished her boots but missed the mud dried along one heel. A woman trying to look composed with nowhere safe left to go. He signed first. His handwriting was plain and steady. Then Claire signed, Claire Whitaker Grayson. Victoria watched the pen move, and something in her face hardened. Not because the marriage offended her, because it had interrupted something. Outside, wind pushed loose snow against the courthouse windows. Late November in Montana always carried a kind of warning in the air. The wheat fields outside had already gone flat and silver. Pickup trucks idled along Main Street with exhaust curling beneath the traffic lights. A plastic wreath banged softly against the glassed door of the tax office across the road. Elias held the courthouse door open for Claire. She stepped through without looking back. Only when they reached his old green Ford outside did she stop. Her breath came out white in the cold. "Why did you say that?" she asked. Elias unlocked the truck. "Say what?" "The truth might protect us." He opened the passenger door, but she did not get in. For 3 seconds, only the wind answered. Then Claire reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small brass pocket watch. It was old, scratched along the rim, with a crack running across the glass. Elias had seen it once before, years earlier, hanging from Theodore Whitaker's vest chain when the old man came out to Mill Road to help him save a dying calf in the middle of an ice storm. Theodore had been the only man in Briar Glen who never looked at Elias's scar before looking at his eyes. Claire held the watch like it weighed more than metal. "My father gave me this the night before he died," she said. "He told me if anything happened, I should bring it to you." Elias looked down at the watch. "The second hand wasn't moving. He said that?" Claire nodded. "He said you were the only man in this town who knew how to keep a promise even when it cost you something." Elias looked toward the courthouse. Through the glass doors, Victoria Sterling was still standing inside, watching them. Claire lowered her voice. "There's something inside it." Elias looked back at her. "What?" "I don't know. It won't open." She pressed the watch into his palm. The brass was cold. For a moment, Elias was not standing outside the courthouse with a woman he had married less than 10 minutes earlier. He was back in the burned field 12 years ago, pinned beneath the overturned tractor, half his face wet and hot, Theodore Whitaker kneeling beside him in the mud. "Stay with me, son." That was what Theodore had said, not boy, not poor thing, son. Elias closed his fingers around the watch. Across the street, a black sedan started. Victoria Sterling's driver pulled away from the curb, too slowly. Claire followed his gaze. "She's afraid of it," Elias said. Claire swallowed. "Of the watch?" "No," Elias said. He looked at the courthouse certificate in her hand. "Of why your father gave it to me." The drive back to Mill Road took 28 minutes, though neither of them spoke for the first 10. The truck heater made a tired rattling sound under the dashboard. A crack in the windshield ran from the lower corner toward the center like a frozen river. Empty feed sacks lay folded behind the seat. On the floor near Elias' boots sat a coffee cup from 3 days ago, half full, the surface dark and still. Claire sat with both hands around the pocket watch. She was still wearing the silver ring. Elias kept his eyes on the road. The land opened wider as they left Briar Glen behind. Fences leaned beneath old snow. Crows moved across the cut fields. The mountains in the distance looked blue and indifferent, the way they always did when men believed their problems were large. Elias had lived alone on the Grayson farm for 6 years. Before that, he had lived there with his mother until her lungs failed in winter. Before that, with his father, who had drunk too much after the mill closed and drove his truck into a cottonwood tree before Elias turned 20. The farm was not beautiful in the way real estate people meant beautiful. The barn needed paint. The porch sagged on the left side. The kitchen sink leaked if the handle was turned too far. But the soil was good, the well was clean. And the house, for all its silence, had never asked him to explain his face. Claire had come to him 3 nights ago in the rain. Not to ask for marriage, not at first. She had stood beneath the porch light holding one suitcase, her hair wet against her cheeks, and said only, "My father told me you would know what to do." Elias had not known what to do, that was the truth. He had only known that Theodore Whitaker once sat beside his hospital bed after the accident when everyone else sent flowers in discomfort. Theodore had arranged the loan extension. Theodore had paid the surgeon's bill Elias never asked about. Theodore had come to the farm every Saturday for a month and repaired the ruined tractor without speaking of charity. A debt like that did not disappear because the man who gave it was dead. So when Claire told him Victoria Sterling had fired her from the Whitaker Foundation, accused her of stealing donor funds, locked her out of her father's office, and convinced the bank to freeze what remained of her inheritance, Elias had listened. When she said the landlord had given her 5 days to leave, he made coffee. When she cried without making a sound, he found clean sheets for the room across the hall. And when she said, almost ashamed, that her father's last letter mentioned a marriage provision buried inside an old family trust, Elias had read the letter twice. The trust was strange. If Claire married before the final probate hearing, her spouse gained legal standing to challenge any transfer of Whitaker land made in the last year of Theodore's life. That was the first strange thing. The second was Theodore's handwriting at the bottom. Find Elias Grayson. He will understand the part I could not write down. Elias had not understood, not yet. Now, as his truck turned onto Mill Road, he had the feeling that Theodore Whitaker had left them standing at the edge of something much larger than a marriage of necessity. Claire finally spoke. Do you regret it? Elias glanced at her. The marriage? She looked out the window. The trouble, he almost smiled. There was trouble before you got here. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I've got. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Then she looked at his scar. Most people tried to hide when they did that. Claire didn't. She looked gently, almost carefully, the way a person looks at an old wound on an animal they do not want to frighten. Does it hurt? Only when the weather changes. And when people stare. Elias kept both hands on the wheel. That part stopped hurting when I stopped going where people were. Claire looked down. I'm sorry. Don't be. It saved me money at the diner. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It surprised both of them. The sound faded quickly, but it left something warmer in the cab than the heater had managed. When they reached the farm, Elias parked beside the barn. The old house stood against the gray afternoon, with smoke rising from the chimney and yellow light in the kitchen window. Claire stared at it longer than he expected. It looks different in daylight, she said. Worse? No. She touched the ring again. Lonelier. Elias didn't answer because she was right. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and old floorboards. Elias carried in her suitcase before she could protest. The kitchen table was covered with unpaid bills, seed catalogs, a cracked ceramic bowl full of eggs, and a folded courthouse envelope he had not wanted to look at. Claire took off her coat and hung it carefully on the back of a chair. There was no natural place for her things yet. That bothered Elias more than he expected. A woman should not look temporary in a house she had just married into. He set her suitcase by the stairs. Your room is still the one on the left, he said. Door locks from the inside. Claire nodded. Thank you. He almost said, you don't have to thank me every time I act decent. Instead, he picked up the pocket watch. Do you have a knife? She looked at him. I thought farmers carried knives. Mine's in the barn. Claire reached into her suitcase and pulled out a small sewing kit. Inside was a thin steel tool for lifting buttons. She handed it to him. My mother's, she said. Elias sat at the kitchen table beneath the hanging light. Claire stood beside him, close enough that he could smell rain still caught in the wool of her coat. The watch resisted at first. He turned it over, studying the rim. There were scratches near the hinge, but not random ones. 3 marks evenly spaced. He angled the glass under the light and saw something almost hidden beneath the crack. A letter, not printed, etched E. He pressed the first scratch. Nothing, then the third. A faint click came from inside the watch. Claire stopped breathing. Elias pressed the second scratch. The back sprang open. There was no photograph inside, no note, no sentimental lock of hair, only a key, small, blackened with age. Taped beneath it was a strip of paper folded twice. Claire reached for it with shaking fingers. Elias watched her unfold it. The paper was old, but the writing was Theodore's. Not many words, just one line. If Victoria moves before Christmas, open box 17 at First Northern Bank and do not trust the sheriff. Claire read it once, then again. The kitchen seemed to grow quieter around them. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post beyond the window. Elias leaned back slowly. Do not trust the sheriff, Claire whispered. Her voice had gone thin. Elias looked at the unpaid bills on the table, at the courthouse envelope, at the woman standing in his kitchen wearing his mother's ring and holding proof that her dead father had expected betrayal. Then headlights swept across the window. A vehicle had turned off the road and was coming up the driveway, too fast. Claire folded the paper by instinct. Elias stood and moved to the window. A Briar Glen Sheriff's cruiser stopped beside the barn. Sheriff Daniel Price stepped out first. 2 deputies followed. The sheriff adjusted his hat and looked toward the house. He did not knock when he reached the porch. He hit the door with the side of his fist. "Elias Grayson," he called, "open up." Claire's face had gone white. Elias looked at the pocket watch in her hand, then at the strip of paper, then at the door. The sheriff knocked again, harder. "I know she's in there." Elias took the paper from Claire and slid it beneath the loose edge of the kitchen table, where one plank had lifted years ago and never been fixed. Then he walked to the front door. Claire grabbed his sleeve. "Elias." He looked down at her hand. She let go as if she had touched something dangerous. He opened the door. Cold air entered the house with the sheriff. Daniel Price was a broad man with a neat mustache, clean boots, and the calm confidence of someone used to being believed. He looked past Elias before greeting him. His eyes found Claire. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. Elias did not move. "Grayson," Claire said quietly. The sheriff's mouth twitched. "Right, that happened fast." One deputy looked away. The other looked at Elias's scar and then at the floor. Sheriff Price held up a folded document. "I have a warrant to search the premises." Claire's hand tightened around the pocket watch. Elias stepped onto the porch and pulled the door partly closed behind him. "For what?" "Stolen financial records from the Whitaker Foundation." Claire made a small sound behind him. The sheriff looked pleased that she had. "Victoria Sterling reported several missing donor ledgers this morning," he said. "Given Mrs. Grayson's recent employment termination and the unusual circumstances of today's marriage, we have reason to believe those documents may be here." Elias felt the old anger rise. The kind that had nowhere useful to go. He held it still. "There are no ledgers here." "Then you won't mind us looking?" Elias looked past the sheriff. Victoria Sterling's black sedan was parked at the end of the driveway just beyond the gate. She had not come close enough to be accused of interfering, but close enough to watch. Elias turned back to the sheriff. "You got that warrant signed fast." Sheriff Price's smile thinned. "Careful." "No," Elias said quietly. "You be careful." The porch went silent. Even the deputies seemed to feel the temperature change. Elias stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to make the sheriff look up. "You can search the house. You can search the barn. You can search the chicken coop if it makes you feel useful. But if you touch my wife like she's already guilty, this stops being a search and starts becoming something I'll remember in court." Sheriff Price held his stare. For a moment, the old Elias might have looked away. The man who avoided town. The man who let people stare. The man who had built a life out of silence because silence cost less than dignity. That man was still there. But Claire was behind him, and Theodore Whitaker had left a warning inside a dead watch. The sheriff looked away first. "Search the house," he told the deputies. They found nothing in the kitchen. Nothing in the sitting room. Nothing in Claire's suitcase except 2 dresses, a brush, her mother's sewing kit, and a folded photograph of Theodore Whitaker standing beside a young Claire near a county fair booth. One deputy paused over the photograph. Then he put it back more gently than he had picked it up. In Elias's room, they opened drawers he had not opened in months. Socks, work shirts, a cracked leather belt. A small tin box with his mother's hospital bracelet inside. The deputy holding it stared for a second before closing the lid. In the room across the hall, Claire stood in the doorway while they searched the bed where she had slept only 2 nights. Her face gave away nothing. But Elias saw her thumb moving over the empty place where the pocket watch chain had been wrapped around her wrist. The watch itself was now inside the flour tin. Elias had put it there while the deputies searched the sitting room. People rarely looked carefully at flour. The search lasted 43 minutes. They found no ledgers, no stolen records, no evidence. Sheriff Price looked irritated by the end of it. Victoria's sedan was still at the gate. As the deputies walked back to the cruiser, Sheriff Price stopped at the bottom step. "This marriage won't hold up," he said quietly. Elias looked at him. The sheriff's eyes moved to Claire. "Folks around here know what desperation looks like." Claire stepped forward before Elias could answer. "So do I," she said. The sheriff looked amused. Claire's voice stayed steady. "I saw it in your face when you realized my father left something behind." For the first time, Sheriff Price did not look calm. It lasted less than a second, but Elias saw it, so did Claire. The sheriff put on his hat. "You have a good evening." He walked to the cruiser. Victoria's sedan pulled away before the sheriff reached the gate. That was the second mistake she made that day. The first was thinking Elias Grayson would be too ashamed of his scars to stand in public. The third would come before sunrise. After they left, Claire stood in the kitchen with both hands flat on the table. She did not cry. That would have been easier to witness. Instead, she stared at the wood grain as if trying to memorize the shape of a world that no longer behaved according to ordinary rules. Elias retrieved the pocket watch from the flour tin and set it between them. Then he lifted the loose table plank and pulled out Theodore's note. Claire looked at it again. "Box 17, she said. "First Northern Bank opens at 9. The sheriff will expect that." "Yes." "So will Victoria." "Yes." Claire looked up. "What do we do?" Elias reached for the courthouse envelope and turned it over. Then he picked up a pencil from beside the seed catalogs and drew 3 small lines on the back. "Your father didn't give us a key, so we would walk through the front door." Claire watched his hand. "You know another way?" Elias looked toward the kitchen window, where the last of the sheriff's tire tracks cut through the snow. "No." He set the pencil down. "But I know a man who used to repair the bank's alarm system before Victoria Sterling ruined his business." Claire stared at him. "Will he help us?" Elias picked up his coat from the chair. "He hates me." That answer should have frightened her. Instead, something almost like hope moved across her face. "Why?" Elias reached for the truck keys. "Because 12 years ago, after my accident, he told everyone I caused the fire that killed his brother." Claire's expression changed. "Did you?" Elias opened the back door. The cold entered again. "No." He looked back at her. But he was never wrong about alarms. The old truck started on the 3rd try. By the time they reached the main road, the sun had dropped behind the cottonwoods, and Briar Glen's lights flickered in the distance like a town pretending it had no secrets. Claire sat beside him with the pocket watch hidden beneath her coat. The silver ring glinted when she tightened her hands in her lap. Elias drove without speaking, but inside him something long dormant had begun to move. Not courage. He had never trusted that word. Courage sounded too clean. This was older than courage. A debt, a promise, a dead man's warning. And beside him, a woman the town had already tried to bury while she was still breathing. At the edge of Briar Glen, Claire finally asked, "What's his name?" Elias turned onto a gravel road behind the closed lumber yard. "Silas Boone, the alarm man?" "Yes. And he hates you because he thinks you killed his brother." Elias nodded. Claire looked through the windshield at the dark road ahead. "And we're asking him for help?" "We're asking him for the truth." A small, bitter smile touched Elias's mouth. "Those are usually different things." They found Silas Boone in a metal workshop behind his house, soldering something under a yellow lamp with a cigarette burning untouched in the ashtray. He was thin, gray-bearded, and wore a hearing aid that whistled faintly when he turned his head. The moment he saw Elias, his face closed. "No." Elias stood in the doorway. "I haven't asked yet." "You don't need to." Silas looked at Claire, then at the ring, then back at Elias. "Well, I'll be damned. Somebody married you." Claire stiffened. Elias did not. "I need to get into box 17 at First Northern without using the front entrance." Silas stared at him. Then he laughed once. It was not a happy sound. "You really do bring fire everywhere you go." Elias took the pocket watch from Claire and set it on the workbench. Silas's laughter stopped. He recognized it. That was the first surprise. His hand moved toward the watch, then stopped short of touching it. "Where did you get that?" "Claire's father." Silas leaned back. The cigarette burned down another 1/4 inch. "Theodore should left town when I told him to." Claire stepped forward. "You knew my father was in danger?" Silas looked at her, and for the first time some of his hardness cracked. "Your father knew half this town was dirty, and the other half was scared." Claire went still. Elias felt the room tilt slightly. Layer 1, small anomaly. Silas turned to Elias. "And if he gave that watch to you, then he must have been desperate." "Why?" Silas's eyes moved to Elias's scar. "Because he knew what really happened the night of your accident." No one spoke. The lamp buzzed over the workbench. Outside, a dog barked twice somewhere in the dark. Elias heard his own breathing, slow, careful. "What are you talking about?" Silas looked away. For 12 years, Elias had carried one version of that night: a tractor fire, a fuel leak, his own mistake, a field burning orange under a black sky, a scar, a funeral for Silas Boone's younger brother, Aaron, who had been found near the equipment shed after trying to help. Elias had accepted the blame because everyone else had placed it in his hands before he woke up in the hospital. Silas opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. It was oil-stained and brittle at the corners. "I kept this because hatred needs feeding," he said, "and I fed mine well." He slid the envelope across the bench. Inside was a photograph. A tractor fuel line cut clean through, not torn cut. Claire covered her mouth. Elias did not touch the photograph. His hands had gone cold. Silas looked at him with something worse than anger: shame. "My brother didn't die because you were careless," he said. "He died because someone wanted your south field burned before Theodore Whitaker could file a land injunction." Elias looked down at the pocket watch. The second hand was still dead. But the past had started moving. "Who?" Claire whispered. Silas took a long breath. Then he said the name neither of them wanted and both of them expected: Victoria Sterling. For several seconds nobody moved. The old workshop seemed smaller than before. The buzzing lamp above the workbench cast long shadows across the fuel line photograph, and Elias couldn't stop staring at the clean cut in the metal tubing. Not rust, not damage, not a blade. 12 years. For 12 years he had believed the scar on his face was the price of his own mistake. For 12 years he had carried guilt for Aaron Boone's death, and now a single photograph had turned that certainty into smoke. Claire was the first to speak. "Why didn't you show this to the sheriff?" Silas laughed once. It sounded tired. "Because Sheriff Price was Deputy Price back then." The room went silent again. Claire felt her stomach tighten. Silas leaned against the workbench and rubbed a hand across his beard. "Your father tried." Neither of them spoke. Silas continued. "Theodore took this photograph to the county office. 2 days later the evidence disappeared." Elias looked up. "What? Gone?" Silas shrugged. "Just gone." The old man opened another drawer and pulled out a faded notebook. The cover was stained by oil and rain. Theodore never stopped digging after that. Claire stared at the notebook. "My father never told me any of this." "Because he was trying to keep you alive." That answer landed harder than either of them expected. Silas slid the notebook across the bench. Inside were names, dozens of names: landowners, bank officers, county employees, developers, dates, transactions, property transfers, lawsuits. And beside many of them, Theodore Whitaker had written notes in small, careful handwriting: pressure, threatened, forced sale, missing records, possible fraud. Claire slowly sat down. Her father had spent years building a case, years, without telling anyone, without trusting anyone, without even telling his own daughter. Elias turned another page, then another. Then he stopped. A familiar name sat near the bottom: Victoria Sterling, 37, Proposition 14, Dispute Transfers 5 under investigation. Connection to county officials. Beneath it, Theodore had written a final sentence: "Find who protects her." Not who works for her, who protects her. Claire read it twice, then a third time, because she understood what her father meant. People like Victoria rarely acted alone. Someone important was shielding her, someone powerful, someone who benefited from keeping her secrets buried. Silas closed the notebook. "Box 17 isn't the end." "What is it?" Claire asked. "It's the beginning." The old man pointed at the pocket watch. "Theodore didn't hide that key because it was valuable." He looked at Elias. "He hid it because somebody would kill to get it." The drive home felt different. The truck's headlights cut through drifting snow while neither of them spoke. The pocket watch rested in Claire's lap. The notebook sat between them. And somewhere ahead waited a bank vault that Theodore Whitaker had trusted more than any living person. The next morning arrived gray and bitter cold. A thin layer of ice covered the farm pond. The old barn groaned in the wind. Elias woke before sunrise as usual. For several minutes he sat at the edge of the bed staring at the floorboards. His scar ached. It always did when weather changed. Across the hall he could hear faint movement from Claire's room, a drawer opening, footsteps, a door closing softly. Normal sounds, strangely comforting sounds. For years the house had been silent enough to hear mice in the walls. Now it felt alive. That realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Downstairs he found Claire standing at the stove. Her sleeves were rolled up, coffee was brewing. Eggs hissed quietly in a skillet. The kitchen smelled warmer than it had in years. She looked up. Neither of them mentioned the notebook. Neither mentioned Victoria. Neither mentioned the possibility that Theodore had been murdered. For a few minutes they simply ate breakfast. The kind of ordinary moment that becomes precious when danger begins circling outside. Then headlights appeared through the kitchen window. Both of them looked up immediately. A black SUV, bank vehicle. Claire's expression changed. Elias stood. The SUV stopped beside the porch. Two people stepped out. A woman in a navy business coat. A man carrying a leather briefcase. Neither looked friendly, Claire whispered. Already? Elias already knew. The bank. The woman introduced herself as Margaret Holloway, senior loan officer. The title sounded polite. The purpose wasn't. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where Theodore's note remained hidden beneath a loose floor plank. Margaret opened a folder. Mr. Grayson. Elias said nothing. Due to concerns regarding recent legal disputes involving your property, the bank has decided to reevaluate your loan position. Claire closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the attack. Margaret continued. The remaining balance is $38,600. Elias already knew the number. He knew every dollar, every interest payment, every extension, every sacrifice. You have 14 days, Claire stared. What? Margaret remained perfectly calm. The loan is being accelerated. The room seemed colder. You can't do that, Claire said. Margaret looked at her. Actually, we can. The banker slid several documents across the table. Unless the balance is paid in full. Silence. The old clock on the wall ticked. Outside, a crow landed on the fence. Margaret folded her hands. You understand? No, Elias understood something else. Victoria had moved. Exactly as Theodore predicted, Margaret stood. We'll return in 2 weeks. Then she left. The SUV disappeared down the road. Claire remained frozen. 14 days, $38,000. Neither of them had that kind of money. Not even close. Finally, Claire whispered, I'm sorry. Elias looked at her. For what? This is happening because of me. No, she looked up. Yes, no. His voice was firmer now. This was already happening. Claire lowered her eyes. But she didn't believe him, not entirely. That afternoon they drove to First Northern Bank. Neither trusted the sheriff, neither trusted the county, neither trusted coincidence. The bank stood on the edge of downtown Briar Glen, red brick, 3 stories. Built before either of them were born. Elias parked across the street. The vault sat underground. Box 17 waited somewhere inside. And yet something felt wrong, very wrong. Claire noticed it too, the parking lot, too many cars, too many county vehicles, too many people. Then she saw them, 2 sheriff cruisers. Her heart dropped. Elias followed her gaze. Sheriff Price, standing near the entrance, watching, waiting. The sheriff smiled when he noticed them, not friendly, expectant. As if he already knew exactly why they had come, Claire whispered. He knows. Elias nodded. He knows. Neither got out of the truck. For several seconds they sat there, thinking, watching, calculating. Then Elias looked toward the alley behind the bank. His eyes narrowed. What? Claire asked. Elias pointed. Maintenance entrance. Claire followed his gaze. Small door. Basement level, partially hidden. An old service access. The kind nobody paid attention to. The kind Theodore Whitaker might have noticed. Elias smiled faintly. The first real smile Claire had seen all day. What are you thinking? He started the truck. We're not using the front door. Claire stared. Then how are we getting into a bank vault? Elias shifted into gear. The truck rolled away from the curb. Across the street, Sheriff Price continued watching. But he never saw them disappear behind the neighboring buildings. Because at that exact moment his phone rang. And the news on the other end changed everything. A county employee had just discovered that Theodore Whitaker's sealed probate records were missing. Not copied, not borrowed, gone. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Elias and Claire stepped into the shadows behind First Northern Bank. And neither of them realized they were already too late. Because somewhere inside the vault below them, Box 17 had already been opened by someone else, 3 hours earlier. The first thing Elias noticed was the smell, not smoke, not yet, gasoline, fresh gasoline. He stopped walking. The alley behind First Northern Bank suddenly felt colder. Claire nearly walked into him. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer immediately. A lifetime on farms teaches a man certain things: rain, rot, burned wiring, leaking fuel. Danger often announced itself through smell before it showed its face. And this smell didn't belong behind a bank. It belonged to machinery or fire. His eyes moved toward the maintenance entrance. The steel door stood slightly open, only half an inch, barely noticeable. Claire followed his gaze. "Someone's inside," Elias nodded. The bank had not opened yet. The door should have been locked, yet somebody had entered. Recently. The smell grew stronger as they approached. Then they heard voices, muffled, arguing, a man, then another, then silence. Elias motioned Claire behind him. The narrow concrete stairway led underground. Every step felt wrong. At the bottom stood another door. This one opened into a maintenance corridor beneath the bank. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The place smelled of dust, wiring, and old concrete. And something else, fear. They moved quietly. Then Claire froze. A man lay on the floor 20 feet ahead, unconscious, security uniform, blood on his forehead. A keycard beside his hand. "Oh my God!" Elias ran forward. The guard was alive, breathing, barely. Someone had struck him, recently. The vault corridor stood open. Claire's heart began hammering. Box 17. Elias grabbed the radio, clipped to the guard's belt. Dead, battery removed, professional. Whoever did this had planned everything. Then a metallic crash echoed from deeper inside the vault area. Someone was still there. Elias looked at Claire. "Stay here." "No." "Claire, no." Her voice shook, but she didn't move. "I'm done waiting outside while everyone else decides my life." For a second, Elias almost argued. Then he nodded. Together they moved forward. The vault chamber appeared around the corner, and what they saw made both of them stop. Box 17 stood open. Empty, completely empty. Papers littered the floor. Metal drawers had been ripped from the walls. Several safety deposit boxes were open. The place looked like a hurricane had passed through. But it wasn't random destruction. Someone had been searching, looking, hunting. Then Claire saw him. A man kneeling beside box 17, white shirt, dark jacket, gray hair. He looked up at the sound of footsteps. Shock crossed his face. Not because he recognized Claire, because he recognized Elias. "Run!" The man stood instantly. Elias lunged. The stranger bolted toward a side corridor. Years of farm work gave Elias speed most people underestimated. But age and scars still carried a cost. The man reached a security exit first. The door slammed. Gone. By the time Elias pushed through, only an empty parking lot remained. No car, no witness, nothing. Just snow falling across the pavement. And one object lying near the curb, a photograph. Elias picked it up. His stomach tightened. The photo showed Theodore Whitaker standing beside someone. The face beside Theodore had been deliberately burned away. Only the edge of a shoulder remained. And on the back, written in Theodore's handwriting, "He betrayed me." Claire stared. "Who?" Elias turned the photo over again. Nothing else. No name, no clue, just another mystery, another layer, another dead end, or so it seemed. Back inside the vault, police sirens suddenly erupted above them. Claire went pale. Too fast, far too fast. Someone had called them. And not recently, immediately. As if the police already knew exactly where to come. Elias understood before she did. The vault, the guard, the broken boxes, the missing evidence, the timing. It was a trap. Sheriff Price arrived first. Of course he did. The moment he saw Elias standing beside the open vault, a slow smile appeared. Not surprise, satisfaction. The kind a hunter wears when he finds an animal exactly where he expected. Well, the sheriff looked around. "This doesn't look good." Claire stepped forward. "We found the guard." "Really?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I found you." The deputies moved immediately, too quickly, too confidently, as if instructions had already been given. Elias felt handcuffs close around his wrists. Claire shouted. The sheriff ignored her. A deputy picked up the burned photograph. Another collected the empty box 17. A third photographed Elias beside the damaged vault. The story was already being written, and none of it included the truth. 3 hours later, local news stations reported. Local farmer detained during bank break-in investigation. By sunset, half the town believed it. By morning, almost all of them did. The farm felt different after that, quieter, heavier, lonelier because Elias wasn't there. Claire sat alone at the kitchen table. The unpaid bills remained where they'd always been. The coffee had gone cold. A chair sat empty across from her, and for the first time since arriving at the farm, she understood how much of its warmth came from one man who barely spoke. The sheriff refused bail. The bank filed criminal complaints. The loan acceleration remained active. Victoria Sterling never publicly commented, which somehow felt worse. 3 days passed, then 4, then 5. Claire visited Elias every afternoon. The county jail stood beside the courthouse. Gray brick, small windows, fluorescent lights. The kind of place designed to make time feel slow. Elias sat behind glass. His face looked more tired each day, not defeated, just exhausted. Claire pressed her hand against the glass. "Everyone thinks you did it," Elias nodded. "I know. Aren't you angry?" His eyes moved toward the floor, then back to her. "No." That answer almost made her cry, 'cause she knew it was true. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed, again, by people, by systems, by assumptions, by how easy it was for the world to decide who a man was, especially a man who looked different. On the 6th day, something unexpected happened. Someone knocked on the farmhouse door. Claire opened it. Her breath caught. Samuel Reed stood on the porch. The same Samuel Reed who had been Elias's closest friend for nearly 10 years. The same Samuel who had helped rebuild the barn after winter storms. The same Samuel who had shared Sunday dinners. The same Samuel who disappeared the moment trouble arrived. Claire stared. "What do you want?" Samuel looked awful, sleep-deprived, unshaven, terrified. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then finally, "I need to tell you something." Claire didn't move. Samuel swallowed hard. "I worked for Victoria." Silence. Wind pushed snow across the yard. Claire felt something inside her go cold. Samuel looked down. Not at first. His voice cracked. "At first she just paid me for information." Every muscle in Claire's body tightened. Samuel continued. "The farm, the loan, Theodore, the bank." His eyes filled. "I thought it was business." Claire's voice emerged almost as a whisper. "And when did you realize it wasn't?" Samuel looked at her. "When Aaron Boone died." The world seemed to stop. Claire's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Samuel took a shaking breath. "I knew about the fuel line." Claire stared. No. Samuel looked like a man carrying a grave on his back. "I didn't cut it." His voice broke. "But I knew who did." Claire stepped backward. The room tilted. "You knew for 12 years?" Samuel nodded. Tears, real tears, ugly tears. The kind people can't fake. Victoria paid somebody. His shoulders shook. "I was supposed to stay quiet." Claire felt anger unlike anything she had ever known. Not hot anger, cold anger, dangerous anger. The kind that arrives when grief finally finds direction. Samuel reached into his coat. Claire instantly stepped back. He froze. Then slowly removed a flash drive, old, scratched, worn. "I copied these from Victoria's private records." Claire stared. "What are they?" Samuel looked toward the dark horizon, toward town, toward all the lies that had survived for decades. Then he answered. "Enough to destroy her." That should have been the biggest revelation. It wasn't, because Samuel wasn't finished. His face had gone white. There was someone else. Claire's stomach dropped. "What?" Samuel looked directly into her eyes. "The man standing beside your father in that photograph, the burned photograph, the missing face, the betrayal." Samuel's hands trembled. "I know who he is." Claire couldn't breathe. For months, for years. Her father had hidden clues, warnings, evidence, and finally somebody knew. Who? Samuel looked like a man about to jump off a cliff. Then he said, "It wasn't a banker." Pause. "It wasn't a politician." Pause. "It wasn't Victoria." Another pause. Then the sentence that changed everything. "It was Father Michael Donovan, the priest, the man Theodore trusted most, the man who baptized Claire, the man who buried Theodore, the man who defended Elias in public, the man everyone believed was good." Samuel whispered, "He's the one who betrayed your father." Outside, somewhere beyond the fields, lightning flashed across the winter sky, and for the first time since Theodore Whitaker died, Claire no longer knew who could be trusted. Not the sheriff, not the bank, not Samuel, not even the priest. Meanwhile, 10 miles away in a jail cell beneath the courthouse, Elias Grayson received unexpected news. A deputy unlocked his door. "You're being transferred." Elias looked up. "Why?" The deputy avoided his eyes, then quietly answered, "Because somebody just burned down your barn." And as flames consumed the heart of the Grayson farm, another truth was about to emerge. a truth far darker than Theodore Whitaker had ever imagined. The barn was still smoking when Elias arrived. The sheriff had finally released him after public pressure began building around the bank case. Officially, there wasn't enough evidence to hold him longer. Unofficially, too many people had started asking why every piece of evidence seemed to appear exactly where it would hurt him most. Snow fell through the black skeleton of what had once been his barn. The smell hit him first: wet ash, burned wood, burned hay, burned years of work. The red barn his father built. The barn where Theodore Whitaker once spent an entire weekend helping him replace a collapsed support beam. The barn where Claire had laughed the first time a goat chased her across the yard. Gone. Elias stood in silence. Beside him, Claire slipped her hand into his. Neither spoke. Some losses deserve quiet. Then he noticed something strange. The chickens, the goats, the feed. Most of it had been moved, not burned. Moved. Elias frowned. Who did this? A voice answered behind him. The town. They turned. Samuel Reed stood near the fence. So did Silas Boone. Then another neighbor. And another. People began stepping forward from the snowy road. People Elias barely knew. People who used to avoid him. People who had spent years looking away when he entered a room. Old ranchers, store owners, mechanics, teachers, a dozen, then 20, then more. Samuel pointed toward the surviving livestock. We got here before the fire spread. An old woman stepped forward. The goats are at my place. Another man nodded. I've got your tractor. A farmer lifted a hand. The feed's in my shed. Claire felt tears rise. Not because the barn was gone. Because people had finally started seeing the man she had always seen. Not the scar, the man. 3 days later, the hearing began. The entire town showed up. Every seat inside Briar Glen Town Hall was filled. People lined the walls. Others stood outside watching through windows. At the front sat Judge Harold Benton. To one side sat Victoria Sterling, still elegant, still composed, still dangerous. But for the first time she looked tired. Across from her sat Elias and Claire together. The silver ring remained on Claire's finger. The old pocket watch sat on the table beside them, a silent witness. The hearing opened with evidence from the bank, then the sheriff, then Victoria's attorneys. For nearly 2 hours, everything seemed to be going their way. The narrative was simple. Elias Grayson was unstable. Claire Whitaker was desperate. The marriage was suspicious. The bank incident was suspicious. The missing records were suspicious. Everything pointed toward them. Then Samuel Reed stood. The room shifted immediately. Everyone knew him. Everyone trusted him. Or had trusted him. His voice shook when he took the oath, because the truth is heavier than lies, especially after carrying it for years. I worked for Victoria Sterling. The room exploded. The judge slammed his gavel. People shouted. Victoria's face went white. Samuel continued. He spoke about payments, bribes, property acquisitions, threats, the fuel line. Aaron Boone, the tractor fire. The accident that scarred Elias forever. One by one, pieces began falling into place. Not dramatic revelations, evidence, records, transactions, checks, emails, dates, facts. The way truth usually arrives. Slowly, all at once. Victoria's attorneys attacked him immediately. You're a liar. Samuel nodded. Yes. The room went quiet. The attorney blinked. Samuel looked down. Then back up. I was a liar for 12 years. His eyes moved toward Elias. And he paid the price. Nobody spoke, not even Victoria. Because some confessions cannot be argued away. Then came the next witness, Silas Boone. He presented Theodore's notebook, the photographs, the missing evidence reports, the documented fraud, layer after layer. Year after year, a pattern emerged. Not one crime, not one scheme, a system, a machine. People pressured into selling land, bank loans manipulated, property transferred below value, county records altered, families ruined. And always somewhere nearby, Victoria Sterling. By afternoon, the room felt different. The tide had shifted. But the biggest shock was still waiting. Judge Benton looked toward Father Michael Donovan. The priest sat quietly in the second row, older than before, smaller than people remembered. Tired, very tired. The judge adjusted his glasses. Father Donovan, the room froze. Claire felt her stomach drop. The photograph, the burned face, the betrayal. The priest slowly stood. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Father Donovan walked to the witness stand. No hesitation, no resistance. Almost like a man who had known this moment would eventually arrive. He took the oath, sat down, and immediately said, "Samuel is wrong." The room erupted again. Claire stared, Elias stared, even Victoria looked confused. Father Donovan continued, "Theodore Whitaker never considered me a traitor." Claire's heart hammered. Then why was his face burned from the photograph? The old priest reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully. He removed a folded envelope, aged, yellowed, sealed. Claire recognized the handwriting instantly. Her father's, Theodore Whitaker. The priest handed it to the judge. "It's addressed to Claire." Claire's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. Written 6 days before Theodore died, she began reading. Halfway through, tears blurred the words. The judge asked if she wanted him to continue. She nodded. His voice filled the room. "My dear Claire, if you are hearing this, then events unfolded exactly as I feared. First, Father Donovan is not the man who betrayed me. I burned his face from the photograph myself, not to accuse him, to protect him, because he was helping me." The room went silent, completely silent. The judge continued, "I discovered many years ago that Victoria Sterling was not acting alone. But the most dangerous people around her were not politicians, not bankers, not lawyers. The most dangerous people were those who looked ordinary, those nobody noticed." Claire looked toward Victoria. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in the woman's eyes. The judge continued reading. "There is only one reason I am leaving this information to Elias Grayson. Because he cannot be bought." The room turned toward Elias. He wanted to disappear. Instead, he sat still. The judge kept reading. "People see his scar before they see his character. That has always been their mistake. I have watched him for 12 years. I have seen him lose opportunities, friends, respect, comfort. Yet he never sacrificed his integrity. Most men would trade honesty for power. Elias never did." Claire felt tears running freely now. The judge's voice softened. "If the truth survives me, it will survive because of him." Silence. Then the final page, the final revelation, the final piece Theodore had hidden. "The person protecting Victoria Sterling is Sheriff Daniel Price." The room exploded. People stood, shouting, gasps, disbelief. The sheriff jumped to his feet, too late. Father Donovan calmly produced a second folder. Bank transfers, property records, hidden accounts, years of payments. Everything Theodore never lived long enough to reveal. The sheriff tried leaving. Deputies stopped him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who arrested others was being arrested himself. Victoria collapsed into her chair. For the first time in decades, nobody feared her. Power disappears quickly when truth arrives. The legal consequences lasted months. Property fraud charges, corruption investigations, financial crimes, conspiracy, arson, evidence tampering. The empire Victoria Sterling spent 30 years building began collapsing piece by piece. But that wasn't what people remembered. People remembered something else. 6 months later, spring returned to Montana. Grass pushed through thawed earth. The wheat fields turned green. The new barn stood larger than the old one. Neighbors had helped build it, every beam, every nail, every wall, together. One Sunday evening, Elias sat beneath the old cottonwood tree near the edge of the property. The pocket watch rested in his hand, still broken, still silent. Claire walked across the field toward him. The setting sun painted the horizon gold. She sat beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The farm was peaceful again, not perfect, just peaceful. The best kind of happiness. Claire took his hand and gently placed it against her stomach. Elias looked at her. For a second he couldn't breathe. Then he understood. His eyes widened. Claire smiled through tears. "We're having a baby." The words seemed impossible. For years he believed life had already decided who he would become. The scarred farmer, the lonely man, the forgotten man. The man people pity was a husband, soon a father, loved, needed, home. Elias looked toward the horizon, toward the fields, toward the rebuilt barn. Toward everything he once thought he'd lost forever. Then he looked down at the old pocket watch. The object that started everything, Theodore's final gift. He opened it one last time. Inside the lid, almost invisible beneath years of wear, were words neither of them had noticed before, tiny words, engraved by hand. "Not all wealth is money. The people you trust become your legacy." For several seconds neither moved. Then Claire rested her head on his shoulder. The evening breeze moved softly through the wheat, And for the first time in many years, Elias Grayson no longer felt like a man surviving his life. He felt like a man living it. The town had seen a scar. Theodore Whitaker had seen character. And in the end, character proved stronger than fear, stronger than lies, stronger than power, and stronger than time itself. The pocket watch never worked again. It didn't need to, because the most important thing Theodore left behind was never hidden in box 17. It was hidden in a man the entire town had underestimated.